Good morning, folks. My name is Jim Van Hecky, and I'm the Director for Education Outreach for the North Carolina ABC Commission. And I want to welcome you here today. Thank you for being with us for this exciting virtual conference. I want to thank Preston Bumgarner, 919 Marketing, and our entire Talk It Out team for making this possible today. Our objectives with this conference are to present you with great teachers. I think we've done that. We've got a wonderful group of presenters starting last week with Scott Miller and moving forward through the month of March. Another objective is to encourage everyone to be learners rather than learned. I want to share with you a quote by Eric Hoffer, who said, "In times of change, it's learners who inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists." Science and technology and knowledge is moving forward at a rapid pace. And so we have to continue to be learners and rather than learned. And the past is the past, the future's ours. And also the third objective is that we want to work together, recovery, prevention, and treatment and recovery supports. No silos, everybody working together. We have an impressive list of supporters that have been running across your screen prior to tuning in this morning. All of us are working together to build collective impact across North Carolina. So our schedule today, in a few minutes, you'll hear from Dr. Joseph Lee, who is the medical director of the Hazelden Betty Ford Youth Continuum. More on Dr. Lee in a few minutes. After that, we'll have some questions and answers. Please write your questions into the chat and we will relay them on at the proper time. And then we have a special guest at the end of our program today, some comments by our Governor, Roy Cooper. So with that, I'll ask you to mute your audio and welcome Xander Guy, the chairman of the North Carolina ABC Commission. Welcome, Xander.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Talk It Out Tuesday virtual conference. My name is Xander Guy, and I am the chairman of the North Carolina ABC Commission, as well as the chairman of the National Alcohol Beverage Control Association, which is the national association for the other 16 alcohol-controlled states. One of the ABC Commission's most important goals is to strengthen the public health, wellness, and safety of communities across North Carolina. The Talk It Out campaign, with its hard-working team of ABC staff members, ambassadors, and other important partners across the state, as the primary way we do that. And while I know he does not want the credit, I would be remiss not to applaud the director of the Educational Outreach Section, Jim Van Hecky, for his vision, his relentless work on this topic over the years. He is an incredible asset to us at the ABC Commission and to the state of North Carolina. We are so proud of the work he and his entire team do to reduce underage drinking in our great state. I also want to applaud them and our wonderful partners at 919 for the great work they've done to prepare for this virtual conference. If you've met me before, you may have heard me say that life is all about relationships. I believe strongly that fellowship and collaboration with our friends and peers is critically important. Not being able to gather in person over the past year has been very challenging for me, as I'm sure it has for you. But I want to thank everyone who has contributed to making this event a possibility. While we've all had to adapt and adjust our daily lives, we can't afford to stop this important work or to let the networks of support and collaboration that have been built to fade away. You all know better than anyone that the issues of this generation faces cannot be solved in a silo, and we won't be successful if we go at it alone. This is particularly true, my friends, as we face the new and complex challenges created by COVID-19. We have to rely on and lean on one another because we are all in this together. Maybe now more than ever, young people are looking to us for the support and guidance. That is why we see and are so grateful for all our speakers, partners, coalitions, and ABC boards across the state who work on these efforts on a daily basis. I also want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us and learn more about how we can tackle these challenges together. Whether you're a parent, caregiver, medical professional, teacher, coach, something else, or a combination of all the above, you are so critically important to the health and well-being of our young people. Collaboration between us all is the key to making a collective positive impact in our communities. We hope that you will find these Talk It Out Tuesday events to be valuable over the next month.
Well, I'm excited to welcome as our speaker today, Dr. Joseph Lee. Dr. Lee is currently the medical director of the Hazelden Betty Ford Youth Continuum, but on June 28th, he has been designated as the next president and CEO of the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. He is the first physician ever to hold that position. He is an experienced addiction medicine doctor, and I would just like to share some things that a board member at Betty Ford has to say about him. Susan Ford Bowles, who is the daughter of the late Betty Ford, says this about Dr. Lee: humility, empathy, grace, and love. Those are the values that define Dr. Lee the most. There are also values that were important to my mother during her 33 years of recovery. In addition to being a brilliant therapist and physician steeped in the science of medicine and quality care, Dr. Lee is a deeply thoughtful and insightful person who understands the human condition, the needs of the human spirit, and the power of community and connection. He is beloved by the many families he has helped over the years, and if my mother were still with us, she would love him too. I am grateful to have such a well-rounded and talented leader carry forward and build upon her legacy. Folks, a couple of years ago, I was traveling to Eastern North Carolina and was listening to a webinar with my earphones in as I drove down the road, and it was Dr. Lee talking. And I was so mesmerized and taken by what he said, I had to pull off the road and listen for the next 45 minutes. I had asked him then to speak to a conference we were going to hold in the next spring. He wasn't able to do that, but we're so glad that he's with us today. And so I want you to welcome Dr. Joseph Lee. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me. You can put something in the chat if you can't, but it's really an honor to be here. I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation and share my screen, and then you should probably still see my head in a little box. So let's. So I'm going to do that now. Let's see. Okay. So we should be rolling here. And please let me know, and Preston, Jim, jump in if there's any kind of media glitches on this. But we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome, everybody. My name is Joseph Lee. I am currently the medical director at Hazelden Betty Ford, and I will be I'm the CEO designate, and will take over the role in late June. So I joke around with the current CEO that I'm in the student driver mode of my CEO candidacy. I'm here to talk to you today about alcohol, but I'm going to mix in other substances on purpose because my aim is to really reshape how you all might approach substance use disorders and young people engaging in or adopting in substance use when they're young. So let's get into some of the heavy content for today that I think you'll find useful. The most important thing is that I'm a Dookie. Not everybody hang up at once, okay? We'll probably lose about half of you. But Preston and I have been joking. I'm a Dookie. My wife is a Tar Heel. I did my residency at a medical school. I went to medical school in Oklahoma. That's where I grew up, and I did my residency in North Carolina. Was there for 4 years, so I love North Carolina. We vacation in the Wilmington area. My in-laws live in the Roxborough area, and so we have a great time there. We like to go there every year. This year has been a bit different with COVID, of course. And so, yeah, I just have fond memories of North Carolina. It's always going to be a part of my home and my heart, so I just want you to know that. Duke basketball is having a tough year, but it's a time of adversity, and we're going to rise above it and look forward to next year. I did my adult psychiatry residency at Duke University, then did my child psychiatry fellowship at Johns Hopkins, and then currently I work in Minnesota. And the story I tell about how I got to Minnesota to work for Hazelden Betty Ford is that one day in Maryland I was driving around in the snow, and it was like a blizzard, and so I got really lost and just kept driving, had to fill up the tank a couple times, and I got stuck. And then these good people helped me out, and they rescued me, and they built me an igloo or something. And then when the ice thawed and the snow melted in the spring, I was in Minnesota, and I've been here ever since. And so that's the story I stick with. I have two boys, 9 and 4, and my wife is a nurse practitioner. She got her master's in Duke and her undergrad at UNC, though she will disavow any allegiance to Duke. A little bit about where I work. Hazelden Betty Ford is an organization that's been around for 72 years. We are the largest nonprofit, which is really important for transparency's sake, nonprofit treatment provider for substance use disorders in the United States. We have a lot of sites, Oregon, New York, Chicago, Florida, many in Minnesota, California as well. And so we have a lot of sites in a lot of different states, and we're expanding virtual care services too. We were able to move tens of thousands of patients into virtual care, and our aim sometime in the future is to be in all 50 states with regard to virtual care services, because we just want to help people uplift other voices as much as we can. So that's a bit of what we do. A lot of people, I think, due to stereotypes and stigma, just assume celebrities go for quote-unquote rehab, and I don't really like that term, rehab. We have a full treatment continuum. We have prevention services. We have publishing services, a consulting arm. We do family services, outpatient care, and so we have a full continuum, even though the news headlines often get stuck with, famous people trying to get help. So let's get started on some topics. A couple of objectives. One, we want to understand risk factors associated with the development of substance use disorders in youth and young adults. And the cliffhanger here that I'll mention later is, did you know that you can pick out which young people might be vulnerable for developing substance use disorders when they're in grade school? So years before they touch alcohol, at the age of 10 or so, you can actually pick out the high-risk kids. So imagine that. The science says that we can have some predictive value in picking out those young people and implementing prevention and early intervention plans. That's amazing. And so the second objective is to develop new perspectives. So taking that fact into account, think about approaching high-risk youth differently. What do you do? Instead of waiting for someone to have a severe alcohol use disorder, what do you do in the meantime is kind of what you need to say. Cassie just said, go heels in the chat, so we got to do something about that, Preston. Trends in use. So let's start with what's happening around with use and with COVID and everything else. So I'll talk about a few things in a few slides. This is just an example. This is more than a year old now, but use patterns change and the harm to young people changes. And so I know we're talking primarily about alcohol, but I have the privilege of seeing young people from across the country And I see a lot of kids who deal drugs, who've been involved in different things. And so I see trends happen before they happen. And so I saw young people a couple of years ago, actually probably about 4 years ago, they were buying these cartridges, empty cartridges from China or the black web somewhere, dark web somewhere, and they were putting together. They were getting marijuana concentrate from suppliers in Colorado and California that were kind of selling it out the back door, and then they were assembling their own vaping cartridges for marijuana. And then lo and behold, a couple of years later, that entrepreneurialism led to a lot of people passing away and a lot of people having lung damage that's permanent. So we see a lot of different trends coming and going. And in order to get to the bottom of this, you want to understand some general trends about young people and how they're using substances. So when you actually start with alcohol use, and this is a slide set curated by the National Institute of Drug Abuse, the data they're using is from a yearly survey called Monitoring the Future, done through the University of Michigan and the United States government, that tracks youth use for 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And it's been going on for decades now. So it's got really tight, great data. And what you see is in the purple, you see the 12th graders. In the red, you see the 10th graders. In the blue, in the Duke blue, you see the 8th graders. And what you see there is that binge drinking rates have been going down. If you look in the past decade, they have been going down. For young adults, it's rising again, especially with COVID. But we've done some good things. You all do good work out there. And you've done some things about prevention and limiting some harm. And so past year alcohol use is slightly trending down, but that doesn't speak to the entire population. So when you look at the entire population, it looks like things are going down. But there are certain high-risk populations within this graph that we have to pay attention to, and their use might actually be going up. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. When you think about other substance use, marijuana use is holding steady, and vaping of marijuana is actually climbing over the past few years, as you can understand. Young people like to be autonomous. They like to make up their own minds, but they are impressionable, and they are impressionable to market forces and advertising, how we dictate policy, what the dialogue is about that policy. And so what you look at is when you think about something like tobacco, traditional cigarette use and traditional tobacco use has been going down for decades because we've done a good job with it. And so your prevention efforts, the work you all do daily, makes a difference. On the other hand, when you have marketing forces, you have Juul and you have other vaping cartridges and things like that coming around, that also makes an impression on young people. And for the past few years, we've seen certain drug use patterns holding steady, like cannabis, or certain drug use patterns going up, like nicotine. When you look at then past year marijuana vaping, you can see that a pretty large jump in the past few years with the vaping cartridges and the technology. And we are starting to decrease it a little bit. So we're getting awareness out. Some kids I talk to are scared about not just the potency, but the lung damage, and they have some concerns about that. And so we've seen a little bit of a drop in use, but nothing that we can hang our hats on, because you can see that rapid decline or incline from 2017 to 2019. We haven't reversed that trend yet. It's going down a little bit, but we have a lot of work to do there. When you look at past year nicotine, same kind of thing. What happened is that between like 2017 and 2019, the jumps in nicotine use, it was the biggest jump in the history of monitoring the future of use. And it really was tied to capitalism, advertising to young people. And so we're getting a hold of that trend, but we are in no way reversing it at this time. This is from a Monitoring the Future slide, again, curated by NIDA. That's from the year past. And what they show you is that compared to nicotine vaping, which has been steadily rising, cigarette smoking, this is kind of the success example that really for a long time we've done a good job with traditional nicotine use. But we have some work ahead of us because policies are changing. We have some work ahead of us because the advertising really targets young people, even though they say they don't. And that's where I think your involvement with preventing early alcohol use or intervening early is going to make a big difference. So I said this before, but in 2017 and 2018, the two largest one-year jumps in the 45-year history of monitoring the future, thanks to vaping products. And so it shows you that young people are impressionable, and huge shifts in public health can be made to the detriment of young people and families if we're not careful. So what's going on here? So what you're finding when you really dig into these graphs is you see the bifurcation of risk. You're seeing risk split into two different columns. I actually see a lot of low-risk youth. So I told you that you can predict high-risk youth around the age of 10 and whether they'll develop substance use disorders or addiction later in life. It doesn't mean that they are guaranteed to develop substance use disorders. It just means they're at risk in much the same way that people who text and drive are at higher risk for getting into a car accident, okay? So it's not certainty, but it shows you risk. And what I find in my kind of experience working as a child psychiatrist, seeing people from across the country, I'm also board certified in addiction medicine, is that low-risk youth are using less. They're paying attention to some of our kind of our doctrine, prevention, good public health policies. High-risk youth, though, are using more. They're taking the parts of the news that they like and the messages and the policies that they like that fit their life, and they're actually using more. So you see this carving out where you see a lot of young people going to college and they're using less. And so on the whole, when you look at the entire population study, it looks like we're holding steady, but there are many examples of high-risk youth actually using more. An anecdote about this related to alcohol, and this spans generations, so it goes to older people, is a number of years ago, do you remember when people were like, alcohol is good for your health? You know, a glass of wine, is good for your health. And now that's been largely debunked. But I'd have a bunch of people come to my office, and the only people at the time who touted the benefits of alcohol on their health were people who drank too much. And so the people who were at low risk really didn't care about the health news because they didn't drink that much anyway, so the health benefit, whatever, they kind of just read it and moved on. But the people who were at high risk, who were already kind of in the warning zone and drinking a lot, they took that message to say it's okay for them to drink. So when you think about public messaging and public health policy, you can't look at it in a kind of majority rule, utilitarian, or populist kind of way. You have to, as a healthcare professional, really think about how the high-risk proportion of people are affected, because that will dictate how society is affected in the end. Okay, and that's something that I'll touch upon again later in this discussion. So this is a slide called Benzos and Bitcoin, just to tell you a bit more about drug trends I see. And I'm not going to digress too much into stories because I hear a lot, but I saw the opioid epidemic unfolding in the early 2010s because I saw young people moving from oxycodone and pain medications that were flooding suburbs and other communities, and that turning into heroin later. I saw heroin move to fentanyl. And the way that actually moved to fentanyl, which is a more potent kind of opioid, is through benzos and Bitcoin, believe it or not. I mean, not benzos, but Bitcoin and the dark web. So what happened was the dark web has been around for some time. You know, there are addresses that you can't go on through your normal web browser. You have to have certain software that hides your IP address, and there's a lot of fanciness involved with that. But you find these websites, and there's a lot of shady business going on in the dark web. And the problem with the dark web, though, is nobody trusts each other because there's a lot of shady business going on in the dark web. But what happened with cryptocurrency is all of a sudden you made it so that people could be anonymous and they could leave reviews as to what kind of drugs they were getting in terms of quality. And so you then had all these websites pop up where people were writing reviews anonymously because they had purchased things through cryptocurrency about the quality of drugs they were getting. And two drugs I saw really become amplified in the supply chain side were benzodiazepines like Xanax and fentanyl, which at the time came as a kind of powder, very cheap, amateur laboratory-made synthetic opioid. And it was very cheap, so you could cut it into lots of things. People were mixing it into water bottles. They were cutting it into heroin because it was a cheaper, more potent version of what they could sell. And then you saw a lot of people in the black market basically make partnerships with these labs, and now you see kind of the fentanyl destruction that a lot of people are using fentanyl. And the marketplace has changed even to the point where a couple of years ago, fentanyl was being cut into heroin and fake pills, and young people would tell me, you know, I can't believe I use fentanyl. I thought I was using heroin. I thought I was using Percocet, but it ended up being fentanyl. I can't believe it. 2 years pass, and now they're saying, I know it's fentanyl. I know it's fake, but if I just take a quarter of a tab, I might be okay. and you're seeing a lot of overdose deaths in COVID. You're seeing in the intersection of COVID and the tail of this opioid epidemic, which I hope is the tail, and a lot of people suffering, losing jobs, kids at home without the social contacts and the ability to do healthier things like pro-social activities. You're seeing a lot of people suffer, and we're seeing use and demand go up. You're seeing overdoses go up. You see alcohol consumption going up, and it's mostly driven not by the average population, but the high-risk people are definitely using more. I think the average population is also probably using more to cope and for other reasons, but high-risk populations are really using more. So that introduces some background that we should talk about on the economics of drug consumption. So instead of looking at this from a moral lens, like drugs are bad, which we don't look at it that way, people who use substances are our people, believe it or not. We love people who use substances. They are the people that we advocate for. So we don't throw any shade on people who use or young people who use. When I see young people and they have a lot of friends who continue to use, and I know that they may have to extricate themselves from that friend group in order to be sober or to get well, I tell them that, hey, your friends, we love your friends because they're our people too, and eventually they might also get help, but they're not healthy for you right now. So when we remove the moral lens from it, we can see the truth in drug consumption, which is there's a lot of supply and demand stuff, and there's a lot of consumption dynamics that we have to understand. This is a slide from a newspaper. I think it's the Washington Post. Philip J. Cook is actually an economist at Duke. I think he's retired now, but he wrote a book called Paying the Tab, and this is a slide from that tab. So this shows you the distribution of alcohol consumption from across the country. I have a cool little annotation tool. So what you see is that all the people in the United States are here, and then you see the consumption go up this way. What you see is that 30% of Americans don't drink any alcohol. Okay, zero alcohol. The people I see are shocked by that because they don't hang out with this group. And then you have another 30% of Americans who drink less than one drink, who drink less than one drink a week. Okay, so you have 60% of the population actually who drinks less than one drink a week. And then you see that the graph goes up rather steeply in this population study. Okay, and these are just facts. As the kids say, they're facts. The 20% of Americans, they drink over 80% of the alcohol in the country. Okay, and then 10% of Americans, the top decile, they drink over 50% of all the alcohol in the country. I don't know why that 5 is moving, so I'll just write. Okay. So 10% drinks 50% of the alcohol in the country. Right? Think about that. Most people, when they think about alcohol consumption or other drug consumption, is they think about a bell curve. And you know what a bell curve is. A bell curve goes up like this and goes down. And what you're saying is that on average, the average American is going to go to the casino once or smoke one joint of marijuana. That's basically what the bell curve tells you. And then only these people are going to have problems with it. Not true. When you think about the consumption of any vice, and again, not from a moral standpoint, but just things that people get carried away with, they follow what we call a Pareto distribution. And this is a Pareto distribution where 20% of the population consumes most of it, 10% consumes even more. And this is a fact that you have to know when you're thinking about young people and how to help them best, is because it's not like everybody is using. And there's many examples that we can use in this. So the first thing that you have to think about when you see a graph like this is there's a predatory economy being formed, okay? And this, again, I'm not passing any judgment, but this kind of distribution is true not just for marijuana, believe it or not. It is also true for, it's not just true for alcohol. It's true for marijuana. It's true for video games. It's true for gambling and lottery tickets. It's true for all drugs. So things that are very rewarding that certain people can get carried away with follows this kind of Pareto distribution, P-A-R-E-T-O, not a bell curve distribution. And that's really important for public health. So it's not a majority rule. It's that a significant minority of people consume most of it. So now if you're an alcohol vendor, imagine you're an alcohol vendor, think about who you're going to sell to. You're not going to sell to these people. Okay, you're just not going to sell to these people because you advertise to these people, they're not going to drink anything anyway. Who are you going to advertise to? You're going to advertise to these people. Okay, and what that creates is a predatory economy where your profit margin comes off the backs of people who struggle. Why do you think there are so many liquor stores per capita in neighborhoods that are impoverished? There's a reason for that, because all industries that have vices know that there's this trade-off. While it might be legal, and everything might be kosher on the policy end, who we advocate for at Hazelden Betty Ford, and the people you all should be advocating for too, are that 10 to 20%. We're not passing judgment on the other people who can moderate or other things. We advocate. These are our people. Okay. Another fact in this is when you see young people, if all their friends play Fortnite and they play Fortnite, they're going to think everybody in America plays Fortnite. And what this means is, if you play a lot of video games and all your friends play video games, the way you socially norm is you think everybody does what you do. So this is a big problem in that lots of people who are young only hang out with the people who use substances. So they are shocked when they find this kind of graph of distribution. They can't believe it. So they come in my office and they're like, Dr. Lee, you don't know my high school. In my high school, everybody drinks. In my high school, everybody smokes marijuana. And the Monitoring the Future facts, what they say is actually about 40%, less than 40%, 38, 39% of high school seniors, 12th graders, have tried cannabis products in the past year, and only about 6 to 7% use every day. So in fact, it actually maps itself perfectly onto this kind of graph. Problem is, the young people you see who are high risk hang out with the 6%. Okay? And so they think that's normal. And to kind of help them understand that, being sober or not using substances doesn't mean you have to be a monk and start baking bread in a monastery. It means there's a whole slew of people you can hang out with who don't use like you, right? And that's a big wake-up call for young people. So this kind of graph helps not only with economic distribution and advocacy. You see the predatory economics behind things, but you also see the social norming problems that young people have when they start drinking, because they start self-selecting for other kids who drink. And in fact, one of the research variables when you look at young people who use substances is exactly this. Young people, it's not like, as a child of the 80s, I saw these after-school special movies, and they tell me not to do drugs, and that drugs were bad, and the bad guy always had like a Michael Jackson rhinestone jacket and sunglasses, and they'd say things like, "Don't you want to be cool? Like everybody's doing it." Nobody uses drugs for peer pressure reasons that way. People self-select. Young people have certain kind of brains. They have certain kind of attitudes that are now informed by their genetics and their brains. They may come from a kind of environment that's adverse, and they self-select for other kids who think like them, who have similar attitudes. So by the time that a young person is adopting experimentation into use, their social cohort, their social norming is already disturbed. They're already starting to hang out with people who are high risk. Okay, so that self-selection process is what happens, and by high school, they've selected people who are in that 10 to 20% to hang out with, and it's not until they graduate high school that they kind of look around and say, man, a high proportion of my friends are getting in trouble. Okay, they're getting in trouble. So let's see, let me stop annotating here and move on. So policy implications when you see the distribution of the consumption of everything from lottery tickets to alcohol, and I'm not opposed to gambling, okay? I'm not opposed to things like this. It's just a trade-off that we have to live with in society. We all have to recognize that if we allow a certain kind of vice to be legal, profits will be made on the backs of people who are vulnerable. It's just facts. We can't get away from it, okay? Taxation, on the other hand, can curb some use. But you see a lot of state legislator people saying that taxation is regressive, that it somehow penalizes people. It's actually not true. The economy is regressive and predatory. Taxation of certain things actually curbs some of this use, okay? Curbs some of the use, and that's what the data says. So what you're already seeing is that right now there's a very dangerous kind of intersection between science and policy and kind of populism and where it's just kind of a blunt majority rule, not understanding nuance. And when that starts to impact substance use policy and health policy, you have some drivers that are dangerous because you can make some decisions without understanding the subtleties. So one of the things that I say, and I'll get off the policy thing here in just a minute, is there are many forms of decriminalizing. And you can think about this for alcohol. You can think about this because I get a lot of shouldn't we lower the age limit for alcohol? And I'm doing a debate on that for a conference in October. It's a friendly debate. But it could be for marijuana. And a lot of people are like, should we decriminalize? Should we legalize? Well, first thing to understand is there are many, many forms of decriminalization. And as an organization and as a physician, I'm for that because that's for people. Okay, that's getting people treated for a health condition instead of putting them in a really discriminatory criminal justice system. Okay, that's decriminalization. Legalization also has many forms, though. And the form that we adopt when things go to the ballot, unfortunately, is straight up commercialization, which is the playbook of alcohol, which is the playbook of tobacco. And what happens is that creates the predatory economy I just outlined. And you see other people doing it. So the company Juul, nicotine vaping organizations, they completely advertise towards young people because they want them on the hook at a young age. Alcohol vendors do the same. And so, because if you are selling vices and you know that your profits come from a certain population, the earlier you hit up that population, the more revenue you're going to generate. It's just good economic fact there. Not safe, but that's what it is. So one thing I always say is decriminalization is for people. Legalization, as we interpret it, is for industry. It allows industry, without any handcuffs or checks, to prey upon the people that we love and care for. And it's something that we have to be careful about. Another question is, I get a lot of if we lowered the age limit on alcohol, if we legalize cannabis or other drugs, would that end black markets? And whether you're for or against it, I want to let you know that no, it won't. Alcohol is a great example of this. The reason that there's not a black market for alcohol is that it's not profitable to make moonshine. Okay, it's the price of alcohol has dropped so much that you can go to a bar and at a happy hour, get a beer for $2, $3, and because of that, it's not worth kind of making it in the black market and selling it. And so it's not just the legal status and the policy; it actually has to do with the economics of it that drive down the legal market. What you actually see from vaping and from cannabis and other substances is right now, even with legalization, you actually see an increase in black market because the way it works is you have a grower. The supervision is not so great, so they sell some of it to a distributor and a medical marijuana shop, let's say, but they get taxed on that. Other people make profits off of it, and they have some excess. And believe me, they don't burn those things or trash those things around. It goes out the back door, and it actually creates more of a black market, which is what we see. So a lot of young people I see, not to rag on marijuana, but the black market is very strong, and young people are getting more potent, high quality, quote unquote, cannabis because of this backdoor economics that happens. And so you'll see a lot of policy. You'll see some things about alcohol saying we should just lower the age limit then. And there are some major implications with that people don't tell you up front. One of the things that I see with alcohol is that the research says if, for example, on college campuses you allow young kids who are younger to drink, which some college presidents are for, by the way, and we're not trying to get them in trouble. That's not the point. But what you see is that when you allow young people to drink, there's a lot of damage that happens to communities around that young person, right? So that the college campus, they might be okay. The deans have maybe less trouble to root out, but DUIs, accidents, and harm on kind of the local surrounding community increases. So you're going to pay the price for that. So think about that. So let's get off policy and economics, and let's think more about who's in that 10 to 20%, because those are the young people that we care about. Those are the young people that we do not want adopting alcohol use. And so who's being targeted and what makes them vulnerable? Those are the questions to ask. I think when I see young people and young adults, I see people ages 14 to 25 in general. And I always try to remember from the family perspective how their parents see them. I always try to remember the kind of hopes their parents have for them, the dreams they have for them, the love they have for them. And, that really makes me inspired. And so no matter how angry the young people are or whatever it is, we just love them up, and we use a lot of skill. We train our therapists and our counselors in motivational interviewing and other skills to really help the families out. We involve the families a lot. And I really look at addiction from a developmental perspective. And what I mean by that is this. Addiction, substance use disorders are developmental disorders. So alcohol use disorder is no exception to this. And this is from a research study. The citation is below. And what you actually see here is that the hazard rate, the time that most people develop substance use disorders, you can tell, is between the ages of late teens to mid-20s. That's when most people develop a substance use disorder. And this is using some old language here, so I apologize for that, but that's what the research study was at the time. And so what we do, though, as a society is we deploy resources about right here, okay? Once people have been drinking for so long, so many decades, then we deploy resources here. And that's a big mistake, because if this were any other preventable chronic illness, you would deploy resources here. And that's my plug for prevention, is that the way we deploy resources for substance use disorders is just, it's out of whack. We don't seem to understand that the prevention programs and early intervention programs, working with families, communities, social determinants of health, these things make a difference on this end to eventually lower, not perfectly eradicate, but lower this. And this is cheaper. It's money better spent. But for some reason, we have this idea where we don't think of it as a young person developmental disorder. And so, we often see people in this age category or this age category coming to Hazelden Betty Ford. When I do their life story, I'm like, man, I wish I would have known you here. And that's really sad. That's really sad. And so these are just facts. Addiction is a developmental disorder. No matter who tells you differently, there are people who develop substance use disorders later in life. It does happen. And their risk, for whatever reason, isn't ignited until they're 50 or until they're 60 sometimes. It may not be ignited until COVID hits. And so those are things that need to be highlighted. But in general, most people develop problematic using when they're young. And so we really have to plug prevention. Someone says they can't hear the speaker. Can people hear me? Okay. I'm just going to keep talking unless I see something else in the chat. All right. So let's move on to the next slide. I was trying to find an example of a marshmallow. And so for this other talk I did, I had to find a marshmallow picture that was not licensed. And so I credited it to the person who took this picture. And this is the best I could do with a marshmallow picture for a certain talk. So I just carried it over. You all have seen that story years ago about the marshmallow test, and it's a debunked kind of scientific study. But basically, there's some truth in the underpinnings of it that I'll explain to you. So what the marshmallow test is they put a marshmallow in front of a kid. And there's funny videos on this. And they take school-aged children, and they tell them, okay, you're going to wait a few minutes, and don't eat the marshmallow. And they leave the room. And they say, if you don't eat the marshmallow in a few minutes, I'm going to give you a second marshmallow you can eat. And so the kids are kind of it's hilarious. They're looking at the marshmallow. They're licking their lips, Some of them lick the marshmallow but don't eat it. They mess around with it. Some of them will just eat it and not wait for the second one. And the point of the study is they were trying to show that young kids who were able to wait for delayed gratification, wait for the second marshmallow, projected out to do better in life, okay? Believe it or not, there's a kind of research study called delayed discounting that supports this, but that study, the marshmallow test, was debunked mainly because most of the children were the children of Stanford employees, and so not generalizable to the average population that we run into every day. And so it was kind of debunked. But the underpinnings of the psychology and delayed gratification is actually pretty spot on. And it does have some predictive ability when it comes to the development of substance use disorders. And so what we're really talking about is now we're talking about the 10 to 20% of that population. So not all kids are the same. You heard a bunch of nonsense about your brain doesn't develop until the age of 25. True. But if that were true, then how come more kids don't have problems with drugs? Because, I mean, we're all impulsive. I did regrettable things when I was a teenager. Thank goodness social media wasn't around. And I'm sure you all, are breathing a sigh of relief for that too. But for a lot of young people, even though their brains are immature, even though they are more impulsive, they are different than the high-risk kids in different ways. And you got to understand what risk-taking means. Risk-taking is one of the features in psychology that young people who are prone to substance use disorders have. So young people who might adopt alcohol use early, young people who might drink more heavily and use other substances, you have to see kind of what in their psychology and their DNA, therefore, is a bit different than other kids. And it's not, that they want to go bungee jumping. It's not thrill-seeking per se, because that's more uniform for teenage years. It's risk-taking, and it's a concept that I want to explore. Okay, so I drew this really silly graph, and I'm going to annotate it because it's going to illustrate the point, I think, better. So this is a psychological test they do, and they test for a concept called delay discounting. Okay, delay discounting. And what that means is as time goes on this way, people discount the value of a reward. So the way this experiment works is they'll give a young person the option between $10 today and $20 today. And unless they're paranoid, okay, and I see some kids who get paranoid smoking marijuana, but unless they're paranoid, they're going to pick $20, okay? So at time zero, when you give people the choice between $20 and, say, $10, or $10 here, I'm sorry, $20 and $10, they're going to choose $20, okay, because it's more money. But then they change the experiment around. So they'll say, okay, you can have $10 now, today, but in order to get $20, you have to wait one day. So you can get $10 today one time, or one day later, we're going to give you $20. And most kids will still pick $20. It's just a day. I'm just going to wait, and I'm going to get $10 more dollars. Then they stretch it a little bit. So like, let's not make it one day. Let's make it 2 days. Let's make it 3 days. How about 4 days or 5 days? And so they keep lengthening this. And what you find is that at some point, okay, everybody on Earth is going to say, at time zero, I would take $20 over $10. But if it's $10 today versus 7 days later getting $20, I just want to take the $10 now. I'm going to roll the dice. I want $10 now. I want that instant gratification. So everybody on Earth eventually does this. Okay, everybody on Earth does this. The problem is that some people do this faster than other people. Okay, so what you see is that for most people, as time goes on, that value, that $20 bill is going down, and the more days they have to wait. At some point, they're like, you know what? I just want $10. I don't want to wait that long. Young kids who are risk-taking do this much faster. Okay, they do this much faster. So they can't wait as long in this experiment. So let's say a kid who's lower risk can wait like 7 days. And young people, I'm just being kind of arbitrary here, who are at high risk for substance use disorder can only wait 3 days. And these psychological features, by the way, are visible in young people. Sometimes even in like kindergarten, these things are visible. Kids who can't wait, kids who give up on things if there's not an instant reward. Okay, kids who kind of cut to the chase, kids who can't sustain effort, and you know who these kids are, because now your mind is kind of going in many directions. I'm sure you have a lot of kids on your mind, and in ballpark kind of ways, we kind of know who they are. The converse of this is also true in that when you think about the value of consequences, young people who are high risk also tend to forget faster, not in their memory. Okay, so never mind this 10 and 20 for a second. I want you to think instead about someone who made a mistake. Let's say they procrastinated in school and they're cramming at 2 o'clock in the morning for a test. And so at time zero, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to do that again. Next semester, I'm going to kill it. I'm going to get it. And the memory of what they did stays with them. They don't get dementia. They know exactly what happened. But what happens is as time goes on, the value of that consequential moment fades, and it fades faster than other kids. So day one, day two, they're like, you know what? I'm going to get it. Next semester, Mom, I'm going to show you I'm going to do things the right way. A few days later, well, there were some circumstances, and this assignment's not due until da-da-da-da, I'm going to be okay. And then they go back to their old behavior. And then they're cramming again at 2 o'clock in the morning. They say, now I got it. Next semester, I've learned my lesson. I'm going to do my thing. And then tick, 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 tick. And then now at this new school, I'm going to do something different. And the same thing happens with substance use. So we see a lot of young people with substance use disorders who, they had a DUI, they blacked out on Xanax, they almost were the victims of date rape, okay? And so at times they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to change my life. By the time they come to treatment, they're already about here. Yeah, but I'm not going to get rid of all my friends. And then they kind of start to slide quite a bit, and then they go back to using, and then they want to stop for a little bit, and then tick, 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 tick again. And this cycle is actually what we try to break scientifically in treatment. And we do it by harnessing many empathic skills, not just improving insight, but really getting those young people aligned with their values, because we believe these are good kids who can make changes if they're given the skills. And so this is part of the risk-taking cycle that we try to prevent. So we might be giving a little too much information here, but risk-taking youth are, kind of in layman's terms, they're more driven by outcomes and proximal rewards than other people. Okay, they tend to have more of a no harm, no foul type mentality. So some of the young people who are very high risk for addiction, I ask them a question like, it's very kind of vague. Like, if you do something wrong and you don't get caught, how do you feel? Okay, if you do something wrong and you don't get caught, how do you feel? And they're good kids from a moral standpoint. They've been raised in good families, so this is not a moral characterization. But the way they think about things is they're so driven by reward that I don't want to hurt anybody, but if I tell this little lie to my mom and I get what I want and no one gets hurt, then in their minds, they're able to walk away from it faster, better than others. They can feel relieved actually in situations like that. So when I ask them this question, like, if you do something wrong that you think is wrong and you don't get caught, how do you feel? They're like, well, I feel relieved, or I feel a little guilty, but it doesn't stop me. Or I feel bad, but only after I get caught, after the consequences come. So there's a difference in their decision-making even from a young age that you can tease out. This is one of those variables that the questions tease out. So other kids, on the other hand, same moral fiber, okay, they're just as good, but they're less driven by reward, and they can think a little more empathically. So they might be able to say, I know I'm just telling my mom just a little lie, but if I was on the other side of this, if I was on the other side of it and I was my mom, I wouldn't want someone would tell me a little lie, and that stops them. It changes their behavior. And so you see the value of empathic exercises in helping high-risk youth. Our program is all about empathy. They share stories together to walk in other people's shoes. When they kind of talk about their own timeline of use, it's a time for self-empathy. They're able to see themselves as a third person, and kind of reflect it back upon themselves. And they do activities together. We work with families, all to enhance this kind of empathic perspective, because we have to short-circuit this risk-taking. It's very dangerous. It doesn't matter how much they've used. Their brains kind of work in this way. And then the second thing about young people who are risk-taking is not only are they all about outcomes, but they don't learn very well from bad outcomes. And that's a big problem, so that even when really bad things happen, the sincerity that they have, and they are being very authentic and sincere when they say they want to change their lives, doesn't stay with them. And it's not a problem with their memory. It's just the saliency, the importance of that outcome doesn't stay with young kids who are risk-taking for very long. And so you all have had many conversations with young people you love, and they're like, you know what, I'm going to change my life, da-da-da-da-da. And they mean it at the time. They're not putting you on. But as time goes on, it loses its power. It loses its power because of how their brain works. And that's something that ends up leading to stigma, because then people are like, oh, you did this on purpose, or you lied to me on purpose. And it's not the case. Their brains are just different, and we have to have more empathy in approaching young people like this with a better framework for science. So let's move on to the next slide. So the take-home from this is young people who are at risk for substance use disorders can be identified in grade school, okay? And instead of getting caught up in the severity of the substance use disorder, because we do this dance where, like, you have a mild marijuana use disorder. What does that even mean? Like, I get it from withdrawal and stuff like that, or a mild alcohol use disorder. I see a lot of young people that don't get good prevention services or family services or therapy because their use is mild, and their therapist or their counselor or something, they dismiss it as a phase. Okay, because they don't understand the distribution curve. They don't understand that they're being targeted in different ways, and they dismiss it as a phase, and it's incredibly dangerous. So the way the diagnoses are right now in the DSM-5, it's mild, medium, and spicy substance use disorder, okay? And the problem with that diagnostic model is that it's just that point of time, okay? At that point in time, do they have severe, moderate, or mild substance use disorder, but young people are a trajectory. You know, they're like an arrow that shot out. So someone who has a mild alcohol use disorder, believe it or not, can have greater risk. Okay, you can have greater risk than someone who has a moderate or severe alcohol use disorder that's older, because you have to think about them like an arrow being shot out. What's their trajectory? So don't get caught up in how much they've used only to intervene early or to prevent, okay? Pay attention to their trajectory and where they're headed. Young people who are using at a young age, it's not so much that their brains get distorted. So alcohol definitely does brain damage to young people, but it's a lot of self-selection. So when a young person who's 13, 14 is starting to drink, it's not just brain damage. It's not this gateway thing that you hear about. There's truth in that, but the main driver is they're basically raising their hand and saying, that is who I am. I am this high-risk person. Pay attention to me. That's what they're saying. So do not dismiss it as a mild alcohol use disorder. Okay, next thing is, what are other drivers that impact high-risk youth and why? Okay, and this is a part of the conversation that we have to have where we're putting things into context with other things that are happening, like COVID. You know, high-risk kids, not as resilient sometimes. So COVID has been really tough. In my 13 years as a child psychiatrist, I have had more people reach out for help this year for their young people, whether it's substance use or mental health, than I've had in my entire career. And it says something about stigma. It says something about how COVID has affected people disproportionately, economies disproportionately, and it has been illuminating because it shows you where the cracks in society are. And I can see that mental health and addiction issues, the resources for them have not been there. And I think COVID sheds light on it and that stigma. You know, a lot of people that I see, their parents will take their young people to the hospital, and it's a fancy hospital, and they go into the hospital and they ask for addiction and mental health services, and they often get sent to the back annex, you know, the building that's not as nice. And the message to them is pretty clear that they're second-class citizens with second-class illnesses. And that kind of infrastructural stigma is something we can't stand by. And so with COVID and a number of other stressors, high-risk youth, that 10 to 20% of people that I love and care about, they're being affected in different ways. So let's talk about some of those things. You can see that, you know, suicides are now the second leading cause of death for young people ages 10 to 24. Rates for all ages for suicide have doubled since 2008. People speculate a lot about smartphones, social media, culture, and they definitely play an influence. It's not that social media is bad. Okay, we're going to have technology, but just like substance use, not everybody is affected the same. You know, you have a high-risk young person who they're very short-sighted. We explain how the risk-taking works. And so whether it's rewards or consequences, they tend to get fatalistic. They're all about the now. So if their significant other breaks up with them, they'll never find love again. They just kind of think that way about the world. They go onto social media on a bad day. Maybe they drank, maybe they didn't, maybe they were depressed that day. And they go on their feed for Instagram or whatever they're on, or TikTok. And it looks like everybody else on the feed is having a great time. You know, so-and-so got a new car for their 16th birthday, so-and-so is on vacation, so-and-so just fell in love, so-and-so had a picnic with their family and took this awesome picture. They probably took 40 pictures for that one picture, but whatever. They took these pictures, and by comparison, the more friends they have, they feel inadequate. They look at their lives. Now, that's not reality. Okay, we all know that that's not reality. We all put the highlights of our lives on social media, so there's a lot of it's just not true. But that's hard to discern when you're a young person who's short-sighted, you don't have experience in the world, you have vulnerabilities for mental health and social and these issues, and you get onto social media, and now all of a sudden it can be toxic. So this is not me ranting against social media in general. Just like substance use and other things, for other people, fine. But our interest in public health is for the high-risk group, and I do see an intersection in how social dialogue, our social discourse, how we talk, mental health issues, COVID, the opioid epidemic, all these intersections, I think, come together, and they affect the people that we care about in a greater magnitude. So when you look at suicides very narrowly, you see that substance use disorders increase the risk of suicide 2 to 6-fold. And I've already explained to you, how technology and social media could play a role in this. And so again, it's not that young people shouldn't use social media, but young people who are vulnerable really need to learn the rules. Even those dating apps can be very, very dangerous, and it causes a lot of inadequacy. There's a lot of they'll date somebody, and the kid, as the kid says, they'll just kind of they'll kind of hook up with somebody, and they act like it's just a transaction, that everyone's cool, we're all just kind of friends here, but not really. As human beings, they'll go on a dating app, and if they may not be interested in dating the other person long term, but they wonder why the other person's not interested in dating them long term. So even though they don't want to date the person, they still feel rejected because the other person doesn't want to date them. And when you magnify that, you multiply it multiple times, you see a lot of low self-worth, a lot of superficiality and hollowness coming out of those dating apps. So I've seen that with Tinder. I've seen that with Grindr. I've seen that all the way around. Anyway, getting back on track. There's this tool called the Transmission Liability Index. It's not ready for prime time. It's more of a research tool. And it's a simple questionnaire that can be done on a computer, no fancy genetic tests. And it was able to predict which youth might be at higher risk for developing substance use disorders later on. And this tool basically also predicted later on suicidal symptoms at young adulthood, just to show you that there's a convergence between what I'm talking about. It's not just speculation in the science. There's a convergence of mental health issues, suicidality. It's not some butterfly effect. I'm not saying it's all one cause, but there's an overlap that is significant and cannot be dismissed. And it has to do with how their brains function and interpret the world and how they interact with people. And those things can be detected. We live in a time when technology, again, video game addiction is a real condition. In other countries where substance use and alcohol use is more taboo, you see this a lot. So it's already happening, and in our country, you see it. I worry, for my 9-year-old, because he can't hang out with his friends, so I let him use his iPad a little more, and he socializes with his friends on Roblox and a bunch of other things. But I worry about the long-term effect of that. And so that's my failure as a parent, but that's the reality of today of trying to get young people connected. We want them safe, but the lack of connection is a big disruption in their development. Let me finish up. I just have a few slides to give you all some hope and to give you all some direction when you're thinking about young people with alcohol use disorder. The reason I bunched in other substances with alcohol use disorder is because it's really about the person. Addiction is about people. It's not about drugs. And a lot of the dialogue is about, like, which fast food joint is worse, okay? Think about how silly that is, right? Like, is McDonald's worse than, Burger King? Who cares? And basically, when you're talking about alcohol, marijuana, nicotine, what you find is high-risk people tend to use more than one. So people who drink a lot are more likely to use nicotine. Okay, people who vape are more likely to use regular cigarettes later in life. People who smoke marijuana are more likely to drink, and vice versa. And so it really just has to do with, when you're using that fast food analogy, what you're really trying to pick out is who are the people who go to the fast food joints quickly and more often than other people, and what kind of bad outcomes do those people have compared to other people? That's the conversation that we need to have, instead of getting stuck on one drug is better than another, one drug should be legal and another drug shouldn't be. So when a young person is using nicotine, that's a huge red flag for the future. It doesn't mean they're going to use every drug known to man, but it tells you that if they're an early adopter of nicotine use, their brains are wired in a certain way, and they're hanging out with certain kinds of kids. So think more broadly than alcohol or marijuana, than nicotine. See the person, okay? Don't get lost in which fast food joint is worse. They have different harms, overdose risks, different kinds of addiction, for sure, but pay attention to the young people and their trajectory. That's probably the biggest lesson. So, treatment principles. Prevention first. We talked about that. Early intervention next. If you can't do that, early intervention next. And third is pro-social living. This has been hard with COVID, but a lot of what we do for treatment is we teach them how to have fun in different ways. Our brains are not made for intense reward all the time. We get sick of it. If you listen to some song and you love it, and you're like, hey, these are the songs I like, and you play them over and over again, you get sick of it over time. Okay, a week later, you don't want to hear it. Turn that crap off. I don't like it anymore. And we've all been there. But in that moment, when we first hear it, we think we're going to like that song or we're going to like that artist forever. Not true, right? And likewise, the way our brains are is we get used to reward. So the problem with using alcohol and other substances early is that it starts as priming, where in comparison, other substances or other things that are fun in life don't seem fun anymore. They can't pale in comparison. But then they also become very tolerant to reward, so they feel bored a lot. And once young people are not using substances for a while, they recalibrate. Okay, they recalibrate to normal, and they can have fun again. A good metaphor to use here, or a good analogy is if someone's in a hot tub, okay, and then they jump into a swimming pool. If they've been in the hot tub for a long time and they jump into a swimming pool, the water feels cold, but it's not really that cold. Okay, they just have to stay in the pool. The temperature is actually not cold. The reason it feels cold is because they've been in the hot tub. You see. And if they just stay in the pool, they're going to be okay over time. And that's the kind of reassurance we give, because when young people are drinking a lot and then they stop, it's not just a withdrawal, but psychologically, the way they have fun, how irritable they are, there's a stage they have to go through with a lot of support. And you support that by getting them to have fun. If you want to win with kids, you got to involve families. That's the next line. It just has to. You have to, as much as possible, engage families. All outcome studies are better when families are engaged. We use a lot of a therapy called motivational interviewing. All of our frontline clinicians are trained in it. We do supervision where we audio record tapes and we listen to it together. One of the things that you understand in motivational interviewing is that motivation and capacity are different. What I mean is motivation is, yeah, I think I want to be sober. I'm committed to being sober. Capacity is, can I be sober? And those two things are different. So when you do therapy, you can't just say, yeah, this young person is willing to stop. It doesn't mean they know refusal skills with their using friends. Okay, it doesn't mean that they know new fun things to do or how to improve their relationship with their parents. So capacity is that skill set. Motivation is the urge to do so. You got to move both. Opioid use disorder. I know we're talking about alcohol, but there's a lot of stigma about medications for opioid use disorders. Please use medications for opioid use disorders. At bottom, they will prevent overdoses. They will prevent overdoses. I know they're not completely harmless, but they will prevent overdoses. It's a staple of what we do for opioid use disorders, especially when they become moderate and severe. Last tip is have a long view. Think long term about young people and how you want to treat them. They have lots of ups and downs, but I've hung on to outpatients, some of them for like over 10 years now, and they've had lots of ups and downs, by the way. But the longer you engage, the longer they engage, the better their lives become. And I've seen so much proof of that. So with young people, what you're really trying to do is to change their trajectory. So don't kick them out of clinics they return to use, and don't lecture them all the time. Make sure they feel your love with the skill set you have, and make sure they continue to engage. And if you continue to engage, you will incrementally make the improvements that you want to see. So I'm going to give you a little example to finish up. This is a motivational interviewing example. Okay, motivational interviewing is a kind of therapy used when people are ambivalent, like, I don't know what to eat for lunch. I could go here or there, okay? So when people are on the fence or something, motivational interviewing is very important, but it's just a great way to listen to people. So this is an example, and it's a little questionnaire that you all can do, and I'll tell you what the answer is. So let's say a 14-year-old young person comes in. They have some behavior problems at school. They got some mood issues. They're struggling with attention. And they started drinking early, okay? They started drinking early, so you're concerned about this, right? And they tell you in the session, the only reason I'm coming in for therapy is because I don't want because my parents think I should. I don't want your help, and I don't want to take any medications, okay? So we get this sometimes, The only reason I'm coming here is for therapy. Is because my parents think I should. I don't want your help, and I don't want to take any meds. So the question is, which is the best motivational interviewing MI response? Okay, A, I get it, but it might help you if you just give this a chance, which is a well-intentioned statement that people make. B, I understand you're upset, but your parents want you to see me for a reason. Okay, another well-intentioned statement. C, let me give you some info about what's going on with you. Like, let me educate you on the brain and addiction, basically, and how medications and therapy may help. Okay, and D, you have your reservations. Despite those, you chose to come because you value what your parents have said. So all of those are well-intentioned statements, but the fourth one is the correct statement for motivational interviewing. When you're trying to engage people, respect their autonomy, believe in them and their capacity for change, this is the kind of change we want to make is you have your reservations. Despite that, and you end on the positive, you came here because you value what your parents have said. So that's just one example of the kind of what happens in our prevention and early intervention sessions and in our treatment, kind of a snapshot of it, because there are skills that we can use to engage young people. So I've said a mouthful. It's a lot of information, but that's about all I have for today. I'm going to stop sharing and make Preston the presenter and host again. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for that remarkable presentation. There's so much in that we could talk forever about it. I want to open up for some questions that have appeared in the chat. I don't know who's supposed to read those. Preston is going to read those questions. Preston?
Yes, sir. I'm
Okay.
finding the questions now. Dr. Lee, we have a question. Name here. Can you speak to ACE scores? And sorry. Can you speak to ACE scores, trauma history as it relates to substance use disorder?
So the ACEs study was done. It was a retrospective study where they took adults and they asked them, and they found that there was a very strong correlation between childhood adversity of all kinds. So not just kind of I used to work with Vietnam War veterans at the Durham VA hospital at Duke. So not that kind of trauma, but childhood adversity, in lots of different ways. And they found that lots of people had abuse and trauma and general adversity, and it correlated with very bad health outcomes later in life. And since that time, they've done a lot of better studies even that are prospective that show that young people who are affected by adversity of various kinds and trauma, they impact various outcomes. And there's an interplay between trauma histories and substance use disorders. What you have to be careful about is that it's not one or the other. So even without trauma, some people just have very high genetic loading, and probably about 50% of the variance, that's a scientific term, for developing a substance use disorder is probably genetic. So it's not your fault, it's not dad's fault, it's probably in your gene pool. It has to do with how your brain processes reward. And for whatever reason in your genetic pool, people are just more stimulated, and they form a tighter relationship with reward and rewarding behaviors than other people. But then if you think about fuel on a fire, trauma can definitely be one of those things. Adversity can be one of those things where you have people who use substances or because maybe they have risk in their genes, but they may have never developed addiction until certain adversities happen in their lives. So there's definitely a relationship between the two. When you treat, you should treat both. People do better when you kind of help their trauma, of course, along with their substance use. But it's not as simple as unweaving trauma and then they'll stop using. That's a dangerous kind of cognitive distortion we have to avoid. So it's not as simple as there was a car accident or a sexual assault and somehow diving into that, they make peace with it, and then all of a sudden, because now they're not quote-unquote self-medicating, they're going to stop using. Don't do that. That's foolish. It's connected together. It contributes to part of the cause, makes things worse, but you can't just go to the trauma, reverse that, and hope that the substance use stops because they have an additional substance use disorder, and you gotta take that very seriously.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. We also have a question from Leslie Timmy. Dr. Lee, how do you keep clients in treatment so long with insurance limitations?
Well, we try to be positive with it because you have to partner with people. And we believe that many insurers do want to help people, but they're cost sensitive. It's a challenge, but I'd say 12 years ago, we were a lot of quote unquote. I hate the term rehab because we're a treatment organization, but a lot of rehabs at the time were going closer to the beach and building more swimming pools. And we made an opposite decision. We decided to go 180 degrees the other direction to form relationships with insurers so that we could lower cost of care and help more people. That's a decision we made, and I'm proud of that decision. And the next stage is really just being more creative in that partnership. And so there's many ways to break this deadlock, and it's to contract differently. Sometimes there's this thing called value-driven healthcare where you get a case rate for an episode based on acuity and risk factor pool, and then you don't have to milk so many days here and there. You can really just do what's good for the person. It's kind of a capitated payment model, but there's other creative solutions. And so I tend to look at it in a positive way. I think relationships can be developed, and I think once there are enough success stories of how people can partner, that will spread. and I think other insurers and providers will partner together. But I don't want to underestimate how rocky that journey can be to get there.
Thank you. This question's from Melissa Zins. She said, Dr. Lee, you briefly touched on video game addiction. Would you make the same treatment recommendations for young people struggling with addiction as you just made for substance use disorders and alcohol use?
Well, there are some differences. With substance use disorders, with any kind of treatment, you want to do it in the least invasive place. And so if you can work with the family, you can do outpatient care, that benefits everyone. But there are many kids who use substances where they're not stable out there. They're blacking out all the time. They're in high victimization contexts. And so they have to, for a period of time, come to a higher level of care like residential treatment. I think that's where there are some differences, is where with video game disorder, so they don't call it an addiction, but this video game disorder, I think you can do more on the outpatient basis. And I'm not as familiar as to when the threshold would be that you have to, completely disconnect. And so I think there's a bigger on-ramp for outpatient services in video game disorders, and whereas the safety issues, the withdrawal issues, the sex trafficking issues that really, bother people's lives are more present in substance use disorders than they are in gaming disorders. So there are some differences, even though the principles like motivational interviewing are probably exactly the same.
Thank you. We have a question from George Leroy. He's asked, any federal legislation to promote funding for prevention services across the country?
I don't know if it'll go to prevention, but I know that there's some bipartisan projects now to fund mental health in various ways. And I think the message there is we have to continue to go to state and federal legislators and be politically active. We have to speak for the people that we care about for prevention, because a lot of people in the political arena, they want projects that bear fruit right away. They want to plant trees that bear fruit right away, kind of within their election cycle or term. But the kinds of investments we're looking for that will really help the families and communities we want are intergenerational investments, and we got to get them to see the light there. That's going to require a lot of advocacy on our part. So we do a lot of it. We know a lot of political leaders, but I think in the state of North Carolina and abroad, we have to have the same movement. So there are some bills coming down the road. It's not nearly enough. You and I all know that.
I believe that's all the questions that we have at the moment. If there are any more questions, you guys feel free to send them in the chat.
I think the most important question was there's this person who was wondering, they were off the course for a couple of minutes. Are they going to get their CEUs? And so I think, yes, you probably will get your CEUs. If we don't tell Preston and Jim about it, I think you'll get your CEUs.
Maybe. We'll see.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. I had a question about the unique roles that family docs may have to play with how to start the conversation with a young person, how to get parents to talk to a young person or other responsible adults. Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. Primary care physicians, people in schools, people on the front lines, instead of assuming that people are going to come to specialists like me, where they need to best engage is in the world out there. And primary care physicians are part of that. Nurse practitioners are a part of that. And so they need to do good screening and brief interventions, and there are evidence-based modules to do that. Their job is not to cure or obliterate. It's to start the conversation and start the engagement process and to raise the awareness of the issue. Lots of modules to do that. That NIDA website, by the way, they have screening questions that you can take on the computer, and it can be guided by a clinician or the patient can do it themselves. And it even tells you what to say depending on how they score. You can't make it simpler than that. So all of us need to be doing screening and brief intervention because it's electronic. Anyone with a computer can do it. It's a no-brainer, and it starts the dialogue. So set expectations low. You're not trying to, but you're just raising awareness, educating, nudging them, guiding them in a certain direction by raising engagement, and that's going to, in aggregate, have a tremendous impact.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Dr. Lee, we had a couple more questions come in. One from one of our ambassadors, Ms. Patty Tabiri. She asked, what do you say to community members in getting them to support early intervention with high-risk youth?
You know, when you work backwards and you identify some of the traits of the high-risk youth, they've seen it in their community. So it's not like they're blind to this. They just haven't connected the dots. They just haven't connected the dots. And so in terms of getting the willpower of the people there, pretty easy to do. You do have to give a presentation like I did, get them to see the big picture. How does this turn out? How are other people impacted? What kind of trees do we need to plant here? And they'll get on board with it. But then you got to get that political energy to get to that next line, you know, and then you get into school politics and funding. If your district is able to use healthcare dollars for some of this stuff, all the better. And so I think we're being more creative with it. But it starts with getting a base of stakeholders energized about it. And so you can start with community leaders, you can start with school officials, you can start with parents, but you got to build a little fire, and we think it can be done. In fact, we have some programs in Minnesota where we piloted it, and we have a counselor that's trained by us in the schools, exactly for this reason. You know, so instead of waiting for a severe substance use disorder, we start working with families when we start to recognize that risk. And that's going to make a big difference in early intervention. It doesn't mean, I think a lot of people also think like prevention, early intervention means you're really going to stop everybody. It's not true. It's a no-brainer from a cost-effectiveness standpoint. It doesn't cost a lot of money to do, and it's a lot cheaper than treatment. And if you head some people off at the pass or you change their trajectory, that's a huge cost savings in the long term. But we got to be able to see the big picture. So start coalescing your stakeholders and think strategically about it. Partner, you know, with different people in your community, because I think you all probably have the same voice.
Awesome. We have a question from Ms. Barbara Hayward. What are your favorite prevention models / programs?
There used to be this thing called NREP, National Registry of Evidence-Based Practices, but it got done away with in the last administration, which is kind of sad. But it showed you which ones were a favorite there. We have a product that's a favorite. It's for kind of high school kids, and it's not just a prevention program, but it's kind of a wellness type program. It's called BAR, Building Assets, Reducing Risks, and we planted this at high-risk schools with lots of success. So there's a lot of science behind it. So that's a favorite of mine. But you know, the best prevention programs actually don't talk about drugs. They start early. So it's believe it or not, when you think about the brain functioning, it's not drugs are bad. It's when you teach kids how to be empathic, how to listen, how to problem solve, how to communicate, how to surround themselves with the community, you prevent a lot of problems, not just substance use problems. And so some of the best prevention programs I like are not so focused on substances. They're more general prevention programs that help with graduation rates and all kinds of other problems. And so that's a safe place to make an investment because that's a win for everybody.
Awesome. We have a question from David Clow. You discussed being proactive with regards to prevention. What programs are being used nationally to address this at that level? For example, in grade schools.
There's a lot of regional, local politics around which prevention programs get picked, and so national things are hard to come by. So, but you know, like I said, we have a number of prevention products, FCD, BA, and BAR, Building Assets, Reducing Risk. They're geared towards older kids. But I would say that nationally, I don't know if there's kind of like a one prevention model that's a favorite in grade schools all over, but even things that you do for early childhood development make a huge difference. And so don't discount those as prevention programs. I know when I worked in inner city Baltimore, there was a lot of that. And those things don't pay off immediately, but they make a difference in the long run and they're worthy investments. So I'm sorry I'm not an expert on exactly what mode is most popular out in the arena, but that's something I could research for you.
Awesome. I think those were all the questions. We may get in some last minute questions, but as of right now, that's it.
Okay, Preston, thank you.
Absolutely.
Dr. Lee, I want to thank you for a great presentation and your response to questions. You know, the only bad thing I have to say is you're a Dookie.
It's a
But I
down
got
year
great friends
down
at
year for
Duke.
Duke.
So, yeah, I got great friends at Duke. We actually, here at the ABC Commission, in working with governors, have worked with folks at Duke and Chapel Hill on alcohol and adolescent brain. And we have a great report that both researchers and doctors at both schools have helped us prepare. Next week, our presenter will be Dr. Anita Robinson, who was one of those folks who helped in that study. She happens to be a UNC person. We didn't really plan this, you know, dark blue versus light blue. And I won't say anything about Saturday night either, but but anyway, we love Duke, we love Chapel Hill, and we love the great work that you and your colleagues at both schools are doing. So thank you so much. I want to thank our chairman, Xander Guy, for his remarks and his great support for the work that we're trying to do in our section. I want to thank our supporters. You saw some of their logos running across the screen before, and all the participants that are here with us today. Preston, thank you, and our ABC staff and 919 for all the technological support that you've given. We really appreciate it. To the participants on here, your certificates will be emailed to you by the end of the week, even if you had to drop out for a few minutes. We'll take care of that. And please remember to be learners, and let's work together to make a difference. And as we talk about here with Talk It Out NC, our adolescent program, we believe that parents or responsible adults, be it doctors, be it teachers, be it coaches, be it faith leaders, can make a huge difference in talking with kids. I was taken by the motivational interviewing little quiz you gave us and quickly picked out number D, so I'm glad that was the right answer. You value what your parents have said. So I'd like to close before Governor Roy Cooper comes on for some closing remarks. I want to share a poem with you. It's called Children Will Listen. Careful the things you say. Children will listen. Careful the things you do. Children will see and learn. Children may not obey, but children will listen. Children will look to you for which way to turn, to learn what to be. So careful what you say. Listen to me, because children will listen. Careful the wish you make. Wishes are children. Careful the path they take, because wishes come true. Not free. Careful the spell you cast, not just on children. Sometimes the spell may last past what you can see and turn against you. Careful the tale you tell. That is the spell. Children will listen. Children are looking for us for guidance and help. The earlier, the better. And later on, when there are more significant problems, we appreciate so much that there are professionals like Dr. Lee and his colleagues and our colleagues in North Carolina, all across the state who can help. So let's be cognizant of that. And now I'd like to turn it over to Governor Roy Cooper for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Governor Roy Cooper here. Thank you for taking part in Talk It Out Tuesday. I'm so grateful to the people from all walks of life who are tuning in. Nobody's immune from the impacts of substance misuse, and breaking the stigma surrounding it will save lives. Keep up the great work. Together we can prevent underage drinking and keep all of our communities safe.